I was in the library when it happened. Not the cosy, book-filled kind of library you're imagining. No, this was the cold, sterile one in the east wing of the mansion, the one no one ever used except to store old family portraits and dusty ledgers. I was there because it was the only place I could think of to hide from Camilla's latest achievement. She'd just been named chairwoman of some charity board, and the family was throwing yet another obnoxious celebration in her honour. I couldn't stomach another toast to her perfection, so I'd slipped away, hoping to find a quiet corner to nurse my resentment in peace. That's when my father walked in. Charles Harrington, the man who'd built an empire but couldn't spare a kind word for his own daughter. He didn't knock, of course. Why would he? This was his house, his library, his world. I was just living in it, or so I'd thought. "Evelyn," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife, "we need to talk." I turned, expecting another lecture about how I needed to step up and make something of myself, as if my degree in business and years of unpaid internships at his company didn't count. But the look on his face stopped me cold. It wasn't anger or disappointment. It was something worse. Pity. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to one of the stiff-backed chairs that had never been comfortable. I sat, my stomach churning, as he pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "What's this?" I asked, though I already knew I didn't want to know. "Open it," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I did. And there it was, in black and white, a DNA test proving I wasn't his daughter. Not biologically, anyway. According to the report, Camilla, perfect, golden Camilla, was the real heiress, the biological child of his late business partner. I was just a mistake. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling, as my father delivered the final blow. "You'll need to leave," he said, his voice cold and detached. "Camilla will be taking your place." I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand an explanation. But all I could do was sit there, numb, as the life I'd known crumbled around me. And the worst part, he didn't even look sorry. I didn't cry, not then, at least. I just sat there, staring at that damn folder like it might suddenly burst into flames, and save me the trouble of processing what it meant. My father didn't wait for a response. He never did. He just turned and walked out, leaving me alone in that cold, lifeless room. The silence was deafening, but it was nothing compared to the noise in my head. Not his daughter. Not his daughter. The words looped like a broken record, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. I don't know how long I sat there before I finally moved. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else as I stumbled out of the library and up the grand staircase to my room. My room. For now, at least. I grabbed the first suitcase I could find and started throwing things into it. Clothes, shoes, a few books. I didn't think about what I'd need or where I'd go. I just packed, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip the damn thing shut. Downstairs, the celebration was in full swing. I could hear the clink of glasses, the laughter, the sound of Camilla's voice rising above it all like she was holding court. I paused at the top of the stairs, my suitcase in hand, and for a moment I considered marching down there and demanding an explanation. But what would that accomplish? They'd already made their decision. I wasn't one of them anymore. I never really had been. I took the back stairs, avoiding the party, but I couldn't avoid the final insult. My father had left an envelope on the kitchen counter, a severance check, like I was some disgruntled employee instead of his daughter. I stared at it, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt, before shoving it back across the counter. I didn't need his money. I didn't need anything from him. The last thing I heard as I walked out the door was Camilla's laugh, bright and carefree, echoing through the halls. It followed me all the way to the cab, a cruel reminder of everything I'd lost and everything I'd never really had. The apartment was a far cry from the mansion. It was small, cramped, and smelled faintly of mildew. But it was mine. At least it was for as long as I could afford the rent. I didn't have much, just the contents of my suitcase and the dwindling remains of my savings. I'd taken a job at a diner on the corner, the kind of place where the coffee was always burnt and the customers always cranky. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Barely. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of traffic outside my window and the ache of muscles I didn't even know I had. Waitressing wasn't easy, especially when you weren't used to being on your feet for hours at a time. But it was honest work, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was earning something. Not money, exactly. God knows the tips were terrible. But my pride, my independence. It was a small comfort, but it was mine. The nights were harder. That's when the memories would creep in, unbidden and unwelcome. I'd lie in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, and think about all the ways I'd tried to prove myself to them. The late nights studying, the internships I'd taken without pay, the endless cycle of striving and failing and striving again. For what? To be tossed aside like I was nothing? To be replaced by someone who'd never had to work for anything in her life? I didn't cry, not anymore. I was done crying over people who didn't deserve my tears. Instead, I'd get up, make myself a cup of tea, and sit by the window watching the city lights flicker in the distance. It wasn't much, but it was a reminder that there was a world out there beyond the Harrington name. A world where I could start over. A world where I could be someone. And then, one night, I bought a lottery ticket. Not because I thought I'd win. I didn't believe in luck, not after everything that had happened. But because it was something to do. A tiny, reckless act of defiance against a life that had been anything but kind. I didn't know it then, but that ticket would change everything. It was one of those days. The kind where nothing goes right, and you start to wonder if the universe has a personal vendetta against you. I'd spilled coffee on a customer's lap, gotten chewed out by my boss, and tripped over a crack in the sidewalk on my way home. By the time I got to my apartment, I was exhausted, frustrated, and just plain done. I was on my knees, scrubbing the floor because the landlord had threatened to evict me if I didn't clean up my act, when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. What good news could possibly be waiting for me at this point? But something made me stop. I wiped my hands on my jeans, picked up the phone, and stared at the notification. I'd won the lottery. Not just a little bit. Not a few $100, $200 million. I read the message 3 times, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. But there it was, clear as day. My numbers, my ticket, my win. I didn't scream, I didn't jump up and down. I just sat there, cross-legged on the floor, and laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was sharp, bitter, and more than a little hysterical. Of course, this would happen now. Of all the times for luck to finally show up, it had to be when I was literally on my knees, scrubbing away the remnants of my old life. The irony wasn't lost on me. I thought about cashing the ticket right away, about storming back into the mansion and throwing the money in their faces. But I didn't. Instead, I tucked the ticket into my wallet and went back to scrubbing the floor. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, about proving to them and to myself that I didn't need their name, their approval, or their pity. I could build something on my own, something better. And I would. But first, I had a floor to clean. The morning after the lottery notification, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The ticket was still tucked safely in my wallet, a tangible reminder that my life was about to change. But I didn't rush to cash it. Instead, I sat at the rickety table in my tiny kitchen, sipping bitter coffee and staring at the cracked wall across from me. This wasn't just about money, it was about reinvention, about becoming someone they wouldn't recognize, someone they couldn't ignore. I didn't want to just show up with a check and a smirk. That would have been too easy, too predictable. No, I wanted to disappear, to vanish so completely that they forget I ever existed, only to reappear as someone they could never forget. I started by quitting my job at the diner. I didn't give notice. I just left a note on the counter and walked out. Let them wonder, let them gossip. I didn't care. Next, I packed up my few belongings and moved out of the apartment. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just left. I rented a penthouse in the city under a pseudonym, paying in cash to avoid any paper trail. It was extravagant, sure, but it was also symbolic. This was my fresh start, my blank slate. The walls were bare, the furniture sleek and modern, and the view, oh, the view. It stretched for miles, a sea of lights and possibilities. I'd never felt so small, and yet so powerful. I spent days holed up in that penthouse, plotting my next move. I hired a lawyer to handle the lottery winnings discreetly, ensuring my name wouldn't leak to the press. I reached out to designers, marketers, and investors, laying the groundwork for what would become Phoenix Rising. And through it all, I kept my silence. No social media, no phone calls, no trace of Evelyn Harrington. Let them wonder where I'd gone. Let them think I'd faded into obscurity. Little did they know I was just getting started. With the lottery money securely invested, I threw myself into building Phoenix Rising. The name came to me in the middle of the night, a perfect metaphor for what I was trying to achieve. Rising from the ashes of my old life, stronger and more determined than ever. I hired a small but talented team, designers who shared my vision, marketers who understood the power of storytelling, and a PR expert who knew how to make headlines without revealing too much. The first collection was a labour of love and rage. Every stitch, every fabric choice, every detail was a reflection of my journey. Bold colours, sharp lines, and unexpected textures. It was fashion as rebellion, as reinvention. I poured everything into it, from the late-night brainstorming sessions to the early morning fittings. This wasn't just a brand, it was my manifesto. When the launch day finally arrived, I held my breath. The show was intimate but impactful, held in a renovated warehouse that felt raw and alive. The models strutted down the runway in pieces that screamed confidence and defiance, and the audience, editors, influencers, and buyers, was captivated. By the end of the night, Phoenix Rising was the name on everyone's lips. Orders poured in, and so did the media requests. But I stayed quiet, letting the clothes speak for me. This was just the beginning. I had a long game to play, and every stitch was a step closer to my ultimate goal, proving that I didn't need the Harrington name to succeed. I was building my own legacy, one design at a time. The charity gala was the perfect stage for my return. It was one of those exclusive events where the city's elite gathered to pat themselves on the back for their generosity. And of course, the Harringtons would be there. I'd bought my way in with a hefty donation, ensuring my name was on the guest list, but keeping my attendance a surprise. I arrived in a custom Phoenix Rising gown, a sleek, blood-red number that hugged my frame and screamed confidence. My hair was styled to perfection, my makeup flawless, and the diamond necklace I'd splurged on caught the light with every step. I looked like the heiress they'd always wanted me to be, and the irony wasn't lost on me. The moment I walked in, the room seemed to hold its breath. Heads turned, whispers spread, and then the realization hit. It was me, Evelyn Harrington. Or rather, just Evelyn now. Camilla was the first to approach, her smile tight and her eyes darting around like she was trying to figure out if I was a mirage. "Is that you?" she asked, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. I sipped my champagne, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her squirm. "Oh, it's me," I said finally, my tone light but laced with enough venom to make her flinch. "Surprised?" The look on her face was priceless. But this was just the opening act. The real show was about to begin. Camilla recovered quickly, as she always did. "We've been so worried about you," she said, her hand brushing my arm, like we were long-lost sisters instead of strangers, bound by a name I no longer claimed. Her concern was as fake as the diamonds she wore, and I wasn't in the mood to play along. Worried? I repeated, tilting my head as if considering the word. That's funny. I don't remember any missed calls or frantic searches. But then again, you were probably too busy celebrating your... What was it again? Chairwoman of the board? Her smile faltered, but before she could respond, my father appeared. Charles Harrington, the man who'd built an empire on cold calculations and even colder emotions. He looked older, wearier, but his voice still carried that same commanding tone. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing as if my presence was an inconvenience. I met his gaze without flinching. "I was invited," I said, my voice calm but edged with steel. "Just like you." He opened his mouth to say something, probably another order, another dismissal, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving them standing there, staring after me like I was a ghost they couldn't quite believe was real. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning, and they had no idea what was coming. The morning after the gala, my face was everywhere. Not as Evelyn Harrington, the disowned daughter, but as Evelyn, the enigmatic founder of Phoenix Rising. The press had a field day. Headlines screamed about my mysterious comeback, my rags to riches story, and my stunning fashion empire. Every outlet wanted a piece of me, but I stayed silent, letting the mystery build. Camilla and my father tried to downplay my success, issuing vague statements about how they were pleased to see me doing well. But their words rang hollow, especially when the media dug deeper. Reporters uncovered the truth about my estrangement, painting a picture of a family that had cast me aside for the real heiress. The public ate it up. Suddenly, I wasn't just a designer. I was a symbol of resilience, a woman who turned betrayal into triumph. I didn't give interviews. I didn't post on social media. I let the clothes speak for me, and they spoke volumes. Phoenix Rising became more than a brand. It was a movement. Women everywhere connected with its message of empowerment, of rising above adversity. And with every article, every glowing review, I could feel the balance of power shifting. The Harringtons had tried to erase me, but now the world was watching, and they were finally seeing me for who I really was. Lucas had always been the golden boy of the family business, the one destined to take over Harrington Fashion Group. But his reign was shaky at best, and my sudden rise with Phoenix Rising only made it worse. When I acquired a struggling fashion house they'd been eyeing for years, it was a direct blow to his ego, and his bottom line. He retaliated the only way he knew how, by trying to sabotage me. He slashed prices on Harrington designs, launched a smear campaign questioning the ethics of my brand, and even poached one of my junior designers. But every move he made only backfired. The price cuts made Harrington Fashion Group look desperate, the smear campaign was exposed as baseless, and the designer he poached? She leaked internal emails proving Lucas had orchestrated the entire thing. I didn't gloat, I didn't need to. The industry was watching, and they saw what I'd always known. Lucas was in over his head. Meanwhile, Phoenix Rising continued to soar, its designs celebrated for their innovation and authenticity. The rivalry wasn't just about business, it was personal. And with every misstep Lucas made, I could feel the cracks in the Harrington empire widening. They'd underestimated me once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. The Harringtons had always used philanthropy as a way to polish their image, donating just enough to stay in the headlines without actually making a difference. So, when I started pouring millions into the same causes they supported, it wasn't just charity, it was a statement. I didn't just write checks, I got involved. I funded scholarships for underprivileged designers, revitalised community arts programmes, and even spearheaded a campaign to provide sustainable fabrics to emerging brands. Every donation came with my name attached, a reminder that I was no longer in their shadow. At a gala for a children's hospital they'd long championed, I delivered a speech that left the room breathless. I spoke about resilience, about using privilege to lift others, about the importance of giving back without expecting applause. The crowd erupted in applause, while the Harringtons sat stiffly in their seats, their smiles strained. Camilla tried to one-up me by announcing a last-minute donation, but it fell flat. The media called it transparent and reactive, while my efforts were praised as genuine and transformative. This wasn't just about money, it was about legacy, and with every cause I supported, I was rewriting the narrative. The Harringtons had built their name on exclusivity. I was building mine on impact, and the world was taking notice. It was Sophia who reached out first. My youngest sister, the one who'd always been too sweet for the cutthroat world of the Harringtons, sent me a text late one night. "Can we talk?" it read. Simple, unassuming, and so unlike the calculated moves of the rest of the family. I stared at my phone for what felt like hours, torn between curiosity and caution. Sophia had been the only one who'd shown me kindness growing up, but she was still a Harrington, still part of the family that had cast me aside. We met at a quiet cafe, far from the prying eyes of the media or our family. She looked different, older, yes, but also softer, like the weight of the Harrington name had worn her down in ways I hadn't noticed before. "I never agreed with what they did to you," she said, her voice trembling. "I wanted to say something, but I didn't know how." I sipped my coffee, trying to keep my expression neutral, but her words stirred something in me. Anger, yes, but also sadness. Sophia had been a child when all of this happened, caught in the same web of expectations and manipulations that had suffocated me. She wasn't innocent, but she wasn't entirely guilty either. "Why now?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. "Why reach out after all this time?" She looked down at her hands, twisting the napkin in her lap. "Because I see what you're doing, what you've built, and I want to be part of it. Not as a Harrington, just as me." Her vulnerability caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw the little girl who used to sneak into my room at night, scared of thunderstorms and the weight of our family's expectations. But then, I remembered the gala, the way she'd stood silently beside Camilla, and the anger flared again. "I don't know if I can trust you," I said finally, my voice steady but laced with pain. "But I'll think about it." It was the most I could offer, and as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another crack in the Harrington facade, one that might finally bring it all crashing down. It started with the company. Harrington Fashion Group, once a titan of the industry, began to crumble under the weight of its own arrogance. Lucas's mismanagement had left it vulnerable, and my rise with Phoenix, rising only exposed its weaknesses. Sales plummeted as consumers flocked to my brand, drawn to its authenticity and bold designs. Investors pulled out, and rumours of bankruptcy began to swirl. Camilla's engagement to a wealthy heir fell apart shortly after. The scandal sheets had a field day, speculating that the Harringtons' financial troubles had scared him off. She tried to salvage her image by throwing herself into charity work, but her efforts felt hollow compared to the impact I was making. The media, once her biggest ally, now painted her as out of touch and desperate. Charles, the man who'd built an empire on cold calculations, seemed to age overnight. His health began to decline, and the stress of losing control of the company he'd dedicated his life to took its toll. He tried to rally, issuing statements about restructuring and new strategies, but it was too late. The cracks were too deep and the foundation was crumbling. Then came the final blow. Lucas was forced to step down after a scandal involving embezzlement. Internal documents leaked to the press revealed he'd been siphoning funds to cover his mounting debts. The board had no choice but to remove him. and the Harrington name, once synonymous with power and prestige, became a punchline. I watched it all unfold from a distance, my emotions a tangled mix of satisfaction and sorrow. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? To see them fall? But as I stood in my penthouse, overlooking the city that had once been theirs, I couldn't help but feel a pang of something else. Not regret, exactly, but a quiet acknowledgement of how far we'd all come, and how much we'd lost along the way. They showed up unannounced at my penthouse, the three of them, Charles, Camilla, and Lucas. It was a pathetic sight, really. The once mighty Harringtons, reduced to standing on my doorstep, hats in hand. I almost didn't let them in. Almost. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see how far they'd fallen. Charles spoke first, his voice weaker than I remembered. "Evelyn, we need your help." The words sounded foreign coming from him, like he'd never had to ask for anything in his life. Maybe he hadn't. Camilla stepped forward, her usual poise replaced by desperation. "The company, it's falling apart. We can't keep it afloat without you." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "And why should I care? You made it clear I wasn't part of the family. Remember?" Lucas, ever the hothead, couldn't stay silent. "This isn't just about you," he snapped. "It's about the legacy Dad built. Don't you care about that?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Legacy? You mean the one you ran into the ground?" "No, Lucas, I don't care. Not anymore." Charles tried again, his tone pleading. "We made mistakes. I made mistakes, but this isn't just about us. It's about the employees, the families who depend on the company. Please, Evelyn." I studied them for a moment, their faces etched with fear and regret, and then I delivered the final blow. "I already own the company," I said, my voice calm but cutting. "I bought it weeks ago. You just didn't notice because you were too busy blaming each other for its downfall." The silence that followed was deafening. Camilla's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Lucas looked like he'd been punched in the gut. And Charles just looked old, defeated. I closed the door before they could respond. They didn't deserve the satisfaction of a reply. They'd had their chance, and they'd blown it. Now, it was my turn to write the ending. The day after the confrontation, I called a press conference. Not in some stuffy boardroom or a glittering ballroom, but at the headquarters of Harrington Fashion Group. The building that had once been a symbol of their power now bore the Phoenix Rising logo, bold and unapologetic, emblazoned across its facade. The media swarmed, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. I stood at the podium, calm and composed, waiting for the noise to die down. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice steady. "Today marks a new chapter, not just for me, but for this company. Harrington Fashion Group is no more. From this day forward, it will operate as a subsidiary of Phoenix Rising." The room erupted in murmurs, but I pressed on. This isn't about revenge. It's about transformation, about taking something broken and making it whole again, about creating a future where success isn't measured by the name on the door, but by the impact we make. I paused, letting the words sink in. Then I dropped the bombshell. And to ensure that future, I've decided to donate a significant portion of the company's profits to initiatives that support disowned and marginalised individuals, because no one should have to go through what I did. No one should be made to feel like they don't belong. The room was silent for a moment, and then the applause began. It started slowly, a few claps here and there, before building into a thunderous roar. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled furiously, and I stood there smiling faintly, knowing I'd just changed the game. But the real twist, I wasn't done. As the applause died down, I added one final note. And to ensure transparency, I've invited an independent board to oversee the transition, because this isn't just my company anymore, it's ours. The Harringtons had tried to erase me, but in the end, I'd rewritten their legacy, and as I walked off the stage, I knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The days that followed the press conference were a whirlwind. The media couldn't get enough of the story. Evelyn Harrington, the disowned daughter who'd not only built her own empire, but had also taken over the family business. Headlines called it a modern-day Cinderella story, though I hated the comparison. This wasn't about fairy tales or happy endings. It was about justice, about proving that I didn't need their name to succeed. The transition of Harrington Fashion Group into a subsidiary of Phoenix Rising was smoother than I'd expected. The employees, many of whom had been loyal to the company for years, welcomed the change. They'd seen the decline under Lucas' leadership and were eager for a fresh start. I made it a point to meet with as many of them as I could, listening to their concerns and ideas. This wasn't just about rebranding, it was about rebuilding trust. Camilla and Lucas disappeared from the public eye, their once glittering lives reduced to tabloid fodder. Charles, however, reached out one last time. He sent a letter, handwritten and surprisingly humble, asking if we could meet. I didn't respond. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt, and I was okay with that. Sophia, on the other hand, became a regular presence in my life. She'd taken me up on my offer to join Phoenix Rising, and though it was awkward at first, we slowly found our rhythm. She brought a fresh perspective to the team, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had family. Real family by my side. The donations I'd promised began to make waves. Scholarships were awarded, community programs were revitalised, and the initiatives I'd launched started to change lives. It wasn't just about money, it was about creating opportunities for people who'd been overlooked, just like I had. As I stood in my office one evening, looking out at the city lights, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The Harringtons had tried to break me, but in the end, they'd only made me stronger. And now, I was using that strength to build something better, something lasting, something mine. Sophia and I met for coffee one crisp autumn morning, the kind of day where the air feels sharp and full of possibility. She'd been working with Phoenix Rising for a few months now, and though the initial awkwardness had faded, there was still an unspoken tension between us. We were sisters, yes, but years of silence and betrayal had left scars that didn't heal overnight. She stirred her latte, her eyes fixed on the steam rising from the cup. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "About how I just stood by and let them treat you like that. I should have said something, done something." I didn't respond right away. Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret, and I needed a moment to process them. Sophia had always been the quiet one, the peacekeeper, but that didn't absolve her of responsibility. Still, I could see the guilt in her eyes, and it softened something in me. "You were a kid," I said at last, my tone more forgiving than I'd expected. "We both were, and it's not like you had much of a choice. Charles wasn't exactly the type to listen." She looked up, her eyes glistening. "That doesn't make it okay. I could have reached out after you left. I could have tried harder, but I didn't. And I'm sorry." Her apology was raw and unfiltered, and for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of the bond we'd once shared. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was a start. "Thank you," I said quietly. "That means a lot." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of her words settling between us. And then, slowly, the conversation shifted. We talked about work, about the future, about the things we'd both missed out on. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a sister again. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the city skyline. I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, a steaming cup of tea in my hands, and watched as the world woke up below me. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels rare and precious, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to just breathe. The past few months had been a whirlwind, launching new collections, overseeing the integration of Harrington Fashion Group into Phoenix Rising, and navigating the complicated but healing relationship with Sophia. There were still moments when the weight of it all felt overwhelming, but they were fewer and farther between. I'd built something extraordinary, not just for myself, but for everyone who believed in the brand's message of resilience and reinvention. I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who'd scrubbed floors in a dingy apartment and wondered if she'd ever be enough. That girl had been broken, yes, but she'd also been strong. Strong enough to pick up the pieces and build something beautiful from the wreckage. Strong enough to walk away from a family that had never truly seen her. Strong enough to rise like a phoenix from the ashes of her old life. The sound of my phone buzzing pulled me from my thoughts. It was a text from Sophia. "Morning, coffee later." I smiled, a genuine one this time, and typed back a quick, "Sure." It was still strange, this tentative rebuilding of our relationship, but it was also nice. We weren't the same people we'd been before, and maybe that was a good thing. Maybe we were better. I set my phone down and leaned against the railing, letting the cool morning air brush against my face. The city stretched out before me, alive with possibility, and for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because of the money, or the success, or the headlines, but because I'd finally stopped waiting for someone else to give me permission to exist. I'd given that to myself. The sound of the door opening behind me made me turn. It was Sophia holding 2 cups of coffee and looking slightly out of breath. "I figured I'd save you the trip," she said with a grin, holding one out to me. I took it, laughing softly. "You're early." "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, joining me at the railing. "Too much on my mind, I guess." We stood there for a while, sipping our coffee and watching the city come to life. It was comfortable, this silence between us, and I realised how far we'd come. Not just as sisters, but as people. "You know," Sophia said after a while, her voice thoughtful, "I'm really proud of you. Not just for everything you've built, but for who you've become." Her words caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. "Thanks," I said finally, my voice soft. "That means a lot." She smiled, bumping her shoulder against mine. "Anytime." As the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The past was behind me, the future was mine to shape, and for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I wanted to be. Not because of anyone else's approval or validation, but because I'd fought for it. Because I'd earned it. And as I stood there with my sister by my side and the world at my feet, I knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning.